Hello, everyone, and welcome. A couple of brief announcements. We know many of you are listening in from far away and can't attend any local events or programs, and that's why we provide this free webinar series. We do host multiple webinars per month, so please visit our website to view the current schedule. Simply visit our website at www.johnson-center.org and click on the webinars link on the right-hand side. New webinars and events are often added, so if you're not on our email list, I do encourage you to visit our website and click on the Join Our Email List link that appears on the homepage. And to get instant news and events from the Johnson Center, follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, as we often announce grant and scholarship opportunities, research opportunities, special events, and presentations there. Be sure to check out our YouTube channel at youtube.com/thejohnsonCenter. There you'll find a library of several of our past presentations. We have many exciting programs coming up this summer, including our social skills group and sibling camp, with grants and scholarships available for these programs, as well as for diagnostic services and counseling. We will also host a series of free workshops for parents that include free childcare, including one on ADHD coming up in June. Check out our Facebook page or our website blog for more information. And be sure to follow our colleagues at the Autism Research Institute as they host their own webinar initiative, and they share some great resources on their website and social media pages. If you would like a certificate of attendance after today's webinar, look for a follow-up email in your mailbox 1 hour after the webinar concludes, or look for the link on our YouTube channel in the webinar description. It will contain instructions on how to get your certificate. If you have questions during the live webinar, you may type them into your GoToWebinar control panel. And if you're watching a recording of this webinar, you may email your questions to the presenter at info@johnson-center.org. Today's webinar is presented by Amanda Tami. Amanda holds a master's degree in counseling and psychology and has completed a recertification program in applied behavior analysis. In addition to being a board-certified behavior analyst, Amanda is also a licensed professional counselor. She has experience working with both children and adults, including those who have autism spectrum disorder and other pervasive developmental disorders, ADD, ADHD, anxiety issues, and trauma, both as a BCBA and as a counselor. She has additional specialized training as a counselor in EMDR therapy and its applications to children. Amanda heads up the Johnson Center's Behavioral Services and Counseling programs and is a sought-after presenter. Please welcome Amanda Tami.
Thank you. Thank you to all of you for being here today. I'm excited to talk about mindfulness and its uses and benefits for people with autism. This is an area of recent research interest and an area that a lot of people are interested in and looking into how they might be able to use it or how it might benefit not only people with autism, but people in general. And we're finding that there are a lot of benefits to a mindfulness practice. If you have your own mindfulness practice or have ever tried to establish a mindfulness practice for yourself, you might relate to this image. If only mindfulness interrupted life as much as life interrupted mindfulness. Isn't that so true? It's so easy for life to get in the way of a mindfulness practice, both in the moment while you're trying to be mindful, but also by keeping us from taking the time to be mindful. Things come up, our mindfulness practice kind of gets pushed to the side, or we don't have time to do it right now. We're trying to do it, but all of a sudden we remember that we have something we need to be doing, or the phone rings. One of the key points that I'm going to be trying to make throughout this talk today is that our ability to be mindful is learned through practice. We can't make life stop in order to take a few minutes for our mindfulness practice, but the brain can learn how to better remain mindful in the face of those distractions. So today we are going to start by defining mindfulness. We'll talk about what research tells us about mindfulness for people with autism, but also in general, some of the areas where mindfulness has been shown to be beneficial. I will go over some tips for teaching mindfulness to people with autism. And finally, I'll give some examples of mindfulness exercises that you can try for yourself or for your child or adult or anyone who you know with autism who might benefit from a mindfulness practice. So let's talk about what mindfulness is. Mindfulness is one of those buzzwords that we hear a lot today. Lots of mainstream sources are talking about it. It's a common topic in self-help reads. But what are they talking about? There's a lot of confusion and misconceptions about the term. It simply means being aware of your present experience with acceptance. And if we have that acceptance of the experience, that means that we're having the experience without reaction. So we're not trying to change it. We're not trying to make it stay. We're just accepting what it is. And with acceptance means without judgment. So the experience is not good or bad. We're not doing something right or wrong. It just is. It simply is what it is. And mindfulness is just an awareness of that experience as it is without trying to change it. There are a lot of false ideas and misconceptions out there regarding mindfulness. The first one that I want to talk about is that mindfulness is easy. It is not. It actually takes a lot of practice for most people to be able to say that it comes easily to them or that they do it just naturally. It takes a lot of practice. And really, this misconception that mindfulness is easy, I think, turns a lot of people away from mindfulness. They might try to do a mindfulness activity or establish their own practice and find that their brain just keeps going. They're not able to remain present. They can't be present in the moment. And that's common. That's really common for people to not be able to do that unless they've practiced it a lot. And I mean a lot. It takes a lot of practice. And I think a lot of people have this experience that it's not easy, or it doesn't seem to come naturally to them, and they think, I must be doing it wrong, or I'm not cut out for this. My brain it can't really do this kind of thing. And so they stop. But the reality is, if they continue to do it, if they continue to practice, even though it's hard, it will become easier. But it's not an easy thing to do, and it's not easy, especially to start with. It's another misconception that mindfulness is meditation. Meditation and mindfulness are not the same thing. Meditation is a type of mindful activity and uses mindfulness, but they're not the same. Mindfulness is a formal practice, or meditation is a formal practice, and mindfulness is simply the awareness of the present experience with acceptance. You don't have to be doing a meditation practice to be mindful, and we'll talk more about that once I start giving some examples. Mindfulness is also not the same thing as deep breathing. Deep breathing, or any sort of awareness of breath, can be used to enhance mindfulness or as a tool to help a person maintain awareness of the present. But mindfulness can be lots of things other than deep breathing. Mindfulness doesn't have to mean you have a calm or quiet mind. You're not failing at mindfulness if your mind keeps thinking. It's really hard, and it takes a lot of practice to get to the point that your mind's chatter will stop as you practice mindfulness. It takes a long time to get there. So if your mind keeps, if thoughts keep coming up, if your mind keeps going as you're trying to remain present, that's okay. That's normal. Mindfulness just is the act of saying, oh, there's a thought, and then refocusing your attention on the present. If the thoughts come up, that's okay. It's not bad. It's not a failure. It's normal. Some people believe that mindfulness is in conflict with some religions, or that it promotes other religious practices. It does not. Again, mindfulness simply refers to the act of bringing your awareness to the present experience with acceptance. It is not spiritual or ritualistic. Meditation and mindfulness practices can and are incorporated into some religious practices, but mindfulness itself is not religious. It's simply a mental action, and it has lots of benefits, as we'll discuss. And finally, mindfulness does not require a dedicated, relaxing time or space. You don't have to wait until you're home with no kids around and no stress to do it. You can do it anywhere and at any time. And it's not only something to do when we are stressed. Yes, it is a tool that can help decrease stress, that can relieve stress or anxiety or any sort of dysregulation. But it's actually better to use it routinely as in a consistent practice when you're not stressed. And this makes it easier to use it when stress is high. And it can be most effective if we've had that practice with it. There are lots of benefits to a mindfulness practice. A few of the benefits that are most meaningful to me as a psychotherapist are these that I'm going to describe today. The first is an increased tolerance of emotions. So many of us have the experience of feeling sad or angry, and we just want to get away from it. We just want to make that stop. It's difficult to tolerate things that feel bad. And mindfulness is a tool that teaches us through practice, through using it, that all things, including painful thoughts or uncomfortable emotions, will pass. This moment will pass. And we can handle whatever it is that we're experiencing in this moment, even if it's uncomfortable, even if it feels bad. We can handle it. And that increases our tolerance, our ability to maintain, to be aware of our emotions in that moment. Related to this, mindfulness helps us to decrease escape and avoidance of those painful or unpleasant experiences. Instead of trying to change how we feel or make the thought go away, think something else, we can sit with it. And if we can sit with it, we can deal with whatever messages the painful thoughts or feelings are trying to send us. Mindfulness helps to slow down the mind, to think before acting. We're going to talk about how the brain works in relation to this in just a minute, and the effects that mindfulness can have. But the part of the brain that controls emotions and the parts of the brain that control thinking and the ability to think before acting are separate. And when the emotional brain takes over, the thinking part of the brain doesn't work so well, or is kind of not even accessible sometimes. But through mindfulness, we can keep that problem solving and thinking part of the brain going, even when emotions are high. Mindfulness also helps us to decrease our identification with thoughts and feelings, and therefore separate ourselves as people, our self-image, our ideas of ourselves from our current experience. What we think and what we feel does not have to define us as people. Our thoughts don't have to be true. And our feelings will come and go. If you feel angry right now, it doesn't mean that you're a mean person or that you're an angry person. It doesn't mean that you're going to feel like this forever. It will go. If you have a thought that comes into your head that says, I'm going to fail, mindfulness helps us to be able to separate ourselves from that thought and say, it's just a thought. That doesn't have to be true. That doesn't have to be who I am. And mindfulness can also help us to increase our awareness of emotions, especially at lower intensities. Now, this is important for everyone, but especially for people with autism. Many people with autism have what's called alexithymia, which is the inability to identify or recognize emotional experiences within themselves and in other people. And this is especially true for emotions that are at lower levels. Once emotions get really high and they're out of control, then they might realize that something's going on, that they're feeling something. But once they're at that point, they're already acting without thinking. We're already in kind of crisis mode. So the ability to increase those emotions when they're at lower levels, when they're at, a 3 or a 4 rather than a 9 or a 10, we can better deal with those emotions so that we don't get to that point of crisis. So let's talk briefly about the parts of the brain that I began to mention just a few minutes ago. The different parts of the brain are responsible for different functions, and one part might be more active than others in any given situation. When we're calm, all 3 parts of the brain work in synchrony. We have the upper brain, which is the neocortex. It's also called the human brain. This is the part of the brain that's rational thought, problem solving, putting information together, thinking things through. The limbic system is responsible for emotional processing. This is also called the mammal brain. And the reptile brain is the most basic survival instincts. It's our brainstem and the I just blanked on the other part of the brain that it is. Starts with a C. Sorry about that. The reptile brain is our survival instincts. It's our 5 senses. It's what controls our sleep and patterns of arousal. And when we're calm and we're able to have time to think things through, to process information, the 3 parts of the brain work in synchrony. Information goes either through the upper brain and into the emotional and lower brains, and we can problem solve. We can say, oh, I'm getting this message from my body that says something's happening or something's painful. And the thinking part of the brain can go, it's not really a threat, and we can remain calm. But when distress is high, the lower and middle parts of the brain take over, and access to the upper brain, which is responsible for all that thought, is limited or turned off completely. Now, for many reasons, as we'll discuss next, the brain's ability to tolerate distress in a person with autism may be lower than for a neurotypical person, which makes it even easier for that cognitive part of the brain to turn off and the lower brains to take over. When this happens, our ability to think through problems, think before acting, use coping skills that we've learned is unlikely and even impossible without assistance. The cerebellum, that's the other part of the brain. The other part in the reptile brain is the brainstem and the cerebellum. Okay, so the brains of people with autism are often less able to regulate than the brain of a neurotypical person, meaning they're less able to use all 3 parts of the brain together. There are lots of factors that contribute to this inability to regulate, including autism alone, but also things like other disorders, ADHD or depression, a history of trauma, even how well you slept last night or what you ate yesterday can all contribute to the brain's ability to regulate. People who have autism are not the only ones who have extra challenges with nervous system regulation, but we do know that it's common for people with autism to struggle with this for some of the reasons listed here. I've already mentioned alexithymia, this limited emotional awareness in ourselves. If we don't know that we're feeling an emotion, we can't use a coping strategy. We can't deal with it. Cognitive rigidity and poor flexibility, that unexpected things come up and we don't know how to deal with it. Lower inhibition. Inhibition is the main purpose of the frontal lobes. The frontal lobes are that thinking part of the brain. So if our inhibition is lower, we can't stop to think before acting. We're going to be acting without stopping, without the pause. And that pause is what allows us to think. Without the pause, there's no opportunity to think before acting. Poor problem solving and abstract reasoning. Again, this is tied to that executive functioning, that frontal lobes of the brain. Difficulty reading social and emotional cues. And this is a topic that I'm very interested in, and it's maybe a future webinar. But people who have trouble reading social and emotional cues in other people miss or can't pick up on safety signals that people are sending us interpersonally, that our connection with other people is more difficult because we can't pick up on the signs that are saying, I'm safe. And those signs that say I'm safe are inherently regulating to our nervous system. A sensitivity to change and environmental stimulation, the sensory sensitivities would be included here. Things, the changes to our routine or environment that for someone with autism might be really disruptive to what they expected, or they don't know how to, they don't have the script for what to do now. And a biological predisposition. Some people are just, their physiological arousal is higher than other people. Their baseline level of arousal is higher, and that's just who they are biologically. In addition, people with autism face a range of additional stressors that in their everyday lives that neurotypical people might not even notice. Any or all of these things listed here might be taxing the nervous system of someone with ASD at any moment, and therefore is using mental and emotional resources and is limiting the resources that are available mentally and emotionally to deal with a big emotion that comes up, or to deal with an added trigger, something unexpected, or to think through a problem before reacting. If their nervous system is already heightened, they're already really close to getting to the point that the thinking part of the brain turns off. And each of these is an added complication that someone with autism might face that is adding that tax to their nervous system. So because of all of the additional challenges with emotional regulation and the added stressors that a person with autism might face, there's growing interest in how a mindfulness practice and all of the benefits of it might help a person with autism regulate their emotions and maintain the synchrony between the three parts of the brain. So let's look at what research tells us about mindfulness. In general, not just for people with autism, but just generally, does mindfulness work? Yes. Research has proven that mindfulness is effective in treating a range of mental health conditions, including depression, anxiety, PTSD, chronic pain and other somatization disorders, substance abuse, general psychological distress, and lots more. One theory, and this is just an idea, about why mindfulness has been linked to improvement in so many different mental health conditions is that mindfulness targets the mechanisms of disturbance. It targets the brain's fight or flight response and those connections between the different parts of the brain, rather than the specific symptoms or diagnoses. The same nervous system responses can be associated with lots of different outcomes and diagnoses, and mindfulness is one way that we can improve the nervous system responses regardless of the symptoms that they might cause. Now, according to research that includes the work done by Dr. Daniel Siegel, who is a big name in this area of research and expertise, mindfulness increases the connections between that prefrontal cortex, the frontal lobes, and the lower parts of the brain. Mindfulness can physiologically change the structure of the brain that makes the synchrony between the brains, the parts of the brain, more efficient and easier. Mindfulness, the act of mindfulness, is a state of mental processing that requires a range of attention and emotion regulation and observational processes that are done in a flexible and adaptive way. These are all functions of that cognitive part of the brain. In order to be mindful, we have to be able to think. We have to have that part of the brain working and accessible. And so being mindful allows us to experience the emotions that are happening, the body sensations that are happening, whatever's happening outside of us, and requires that we pay attention to it, that we notice it, that we observe what's happening, creating these connections between the different parts of the brain. Research on mindfulness and autism is more limited, but there are some studies that show that mindfulness can be a good tool for people with autism. A 2013 study found that a mindfulness protocol decreased anxiety, decreased depression, and decreased rumination, and increased positive affect in individuals with ASD. Positive affect means feeling good, happiness, contentment, just positive emotions. So mindfulness in this study was shown to have a positive emotional impact on people who practiced a mindfulness protocol, and it was a very specific, standardized protocol, not just whatever mindfulness techniques work best for you. In these studies, they have to follow a very specific standardized protocol. And a recent study published just last year found that cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness-based stress reduction, which is a mindfulness type of psychotherapy intervention, may be equally effective in treating anxiety and depression in adults with autism. This is a really big deal because it's long been held that CBT, or cognitive behavioral therapy, is the best and most effective type of psychotherapy for people with autism. But CBT definitely has limitations, especially related to emotional tolerance and emotional regulation, when that regulation is not related to automatic thoughts. So this study suggests that mindfulness is as effective as CBT, and so might be a good alternative for people who CBT is not working, or they're not seeing the results they needed from CBT, or CBT is just not the right fit for them. This suggests that mindfulness can be as effective, and it is another option for practitioners to use with populations with autism. Mindfulness may also improve functioning in other areas of living and emotional well-being for both children and adults with autism. So not outside of mental health conditions like anxiety or depression, just these functions of living may show an impulse, or may show benefit from a mindfulness practice. Impulse control, emotion regulation, emotion acceptance, social communication and responsiveness, social cognition, awareness of what's happening socially, rumination, motivation, reason. Excuse me. Recent research has shown each of these areas to show have benefited from a mindfulness practice in people with autism. Another study from 2013 found that a mindfulness intervention for parents was also effective in decreasing parent stress and improving relationships between the two parents and improving parent-child relationships. They looked at family members' individual resources, meaning their coping skills, how they handle difficult emotions, and their external supports that they had in place. Their social supports, what sort of support groups were they doing, what kind of support did they have from therapists or from doctors or other providers. And then they added mindfulness, both as taught them to use them as internal resources, as coping skills, and in the form of external social support. and they found really positive effects on a decrease in parent stress and improvement in family relationships. Okay, so let's talk about how to teach someone with autism some mindfulness techniques. First, I would encourage you to make mindfulness concrete. Move the focus to external and physical and visual things, rather than focusing on what's happening in the body. Have the person focus on something that's outside of themselves. Bring their awareness to something outside and notice what that external thing, how that affects their internal state. Using external tools or external sources to focus on slows down the brain and the body enough that the person can focus on the present experience. If we can't find something external, something concrete to focus on, it can be really hard for a person with autism or for young kids to notice what's happening inside of them. They have so much going on, so many thoughts going all at once, that it's hard to slow that down and just notice what's happening inside. So if we can focus on something outside, something external, we can slow down the mind enough that we can then focus inward. So you might try activities that use coloring, food, the 5 senses, or finding things in the environment, visualizations of breath. So we talked about how breathing can be a mindfulness tool. So for someone with autism or for a young child, you might find ways to make breath external by visualizing it, using belly breathing or bubbles, or use a fidget spinner as something to focus on enough to slow down the mind. And I'll go into some examples of these activities shortly. Make mindfulness routine. Incorporate the mindfulness practice into the daily schedule. Maybe at mealtime, at every mealtime, or at every lunchtime, you are going to teach your child to do some sort of mindfulness exercise. And then they can carry that on once they're in school and are having lunch and you're not there. They can do that same mindfulness activity themselves. If you have an older child who you're not with at lunch, or who, if you work at lunch, then do it at breakfast or dinner. Make it mealtime, make it at 8 o'clock every night. We're going to do this mindfulness activity. Just find a way to incorporate it into the daily routine, the daily schedule, so that it doesn't get lost with all the other priorities or the other things that come up throughout the day. If you make it part of the routine, it's much easier to make it a priority once it's the scheduled time for it. Now, mindfulness is not something to be used only at times of stress. Mindfulness is it's a great stress reduction tool, but we really need to make it routine. We really need to use it all the time, even when stress is low. So use it to explore new sensations, to explore new emotions, pleasant, unpleasant, neutral, familiar or unfamiliar. Just use it at lots of times and lots of opportunities so that your child gets used to using it, not only for stress, but as a general tool. You might also consider trying to get time for mindfulness activities, or a meditation, if that's a tool that your child uses, added into the child's IEP. Maybe a child gets 15 minutes when he gets to school and 15 minutes after lunch for quiet time for a recorded guided meditation. Remember, you can practice mindfulness anywhere. It doesn't have to be at a relaxing place or in your bedroom. You can do mindfulness anywhere. So maybe mindfulness is really helpful for your child, you ask for time for that to be incorporated into their IEP. Once again, for anyone learning mindfulness, autism or not, child or adult, practice is the key. And this is why it's so important to incorporate it into our daily routine and use it throughout the day, not just when stress is high. If we want someone to be able to use a tool or skill when stress is high, they must practice it when stress is low. Otherwise, the use of that skill requires planning and thought. And as we've discussed earlier, that part of the brain that's responsible for planning and thought is less accessible when stress is high. So if they haven't used a tool or practiced it enough that it's second nature, they're not going to be able to use that tool. Their brain isn't going to be able to say, oh, I'm feeling stressed, I need to do this. That requires thought. That requires the ability to think and problem solve. And we can't do that once we're to the point that stress is too high and that part of the brain is less accessible. I would also encourage you, as parents teaching your child or as someone teaching someone with autism how to be mindful, really focus on kindness to yourself. That mindfulness takes effort and it takes practice. And when thoughts arise or they can't stay present, teach them how to respond by just saying, oh, there's a thought, and let it go and bring their awareness back to the present moment. Mindfulness is awareness with acceptance and without judgment. And it can be really easy to be hard on ourselves or feel like we're failing when it's difficult to stay in the present moment or when it feels like we're not doing it right. So mindfulness is also an opportunity for parents to teach their kids about self-kindness and self-acceptance, and that needing to try it again doesn't mean failure. It means we're just practicing. So really encourage self-kindness as you teach someone how to be mindful. And remember that yourselves too. Model mindfulness as parents or caregivers or other people teaching someone how to be mindful. Model it. The first way that you can model mindfulness is by being present. Don't look at your phone too often when your kids are around. Just be with them, be present, turn off the television. Spend time doing activities that promote focus and creativity and asking questions, reading, art, just having conversations. And express your gratitude for things in your life that you feel thankful for. Just notice what's happening right now. Notice what's happening in your life and say out loud what you're experiencing, what's going on, what you can be thankful for, what's difficult. Model it so that your kids see what it means to be mindful, to notice the experience and accept it for what it is. When you're frustrated or anxious or overwhelmed, use these steps. Take a pause in what you're doing. Bring awareness to your breath. Acknowledge and notice what's happening, both internally and externally, and go back to what you were doing. If we just take a moment, stop what we're doing and take a moment to notice the feelings that are going on. Let's say, for example, you're getting really frustrated because your child is taking a really long time getting ready to go to school in the morning and you're going to be late. You're getting really frustrated. Just take a moment to stop, let your mind focus on the present, acknowledge the feelings that you're having, and go back to what you're doing. Simply acknowledging this and taking that breath is an opportunity for our emotional state to come back down, to reset. And be aware of your instinct to act. So often when emotions get high, when we feel really strongly, even when it's a positive emotion, even when we feel really happy, our instinct is to do something. And this is especially true for people who, when people get angry or when they feel helpless, the instinct is, I have to do something, because doing something is the attempt to make that feeling go away. So allow yourself the space to breathe, to be mindful, and maybe even to meditate when your emotions are really high. And this can help to create that space to think before acting, and build that tolerance of emotion. It's okay to feel bad. It's okay to be angry or sad. It'll pass. I can handle this. So now I have just a couple of examples of mindfulness exercises that you might try for yourself or for your kids. So first, I want you to remember that mindfulness is not the same thing as meditation. However, meditation is a form of mindfulness. So if you're looking for mindfulness practices, mindfulness exercises to try, meditation is one. Meditation is a formal practice that requires mindfulness. You have to be mindful during meditation. There are lots of different types. If a meditation is there are specific techniques. A couple of them are focusing on the breath. This is probably the most well-known one. You sit and draw all of your attention inward onto your breath. But there are other types of meditation as well. Use of a mantra, contemplative practices, visualizations. These are only a few examples of the many different types of meditative practices. But meditation is one option, one thing that you might try as a mindfulness exercise. But mindful activities can be anything that bring your awareness to the present moment. So here are some other mindfulness activities that are not meditation, but that do bring your awareness to the present. The first one I want to talk about is mindful eating. This can be a really fun one or a really easy one to teach kids. But adults also benefit from mindful eating. Mindful eating is simply you have a snack, you remove distractions, put the phone away, put favorite toys away, turn off the television, and before you take a bite or before your child takes a bite, notice the feelings about the snack. How hungry are you? Is it really hard to wait to take a bite? Just notice. Then you use the 5 senses. Look at the snack. What do you notice? Do you see what colors do you see? What shapes do you see? Listen to the snack. Does the snack make any sound? What if you move it or shake it? Do you hear anything? Feel the snack. How does it feel in your hands? Is it bumpy or smooth? Is it warm or cold? Smell the snack. Does it smell sweet? Does it smell bad? How does smelling the snack affect how badly you want to take a bite? Are you even more excited about taking a bite? Is it even harder to wait? Then put the food in your mouth, but don't chew or swallow it. Just notice how it feels in your mouth. Do you taste anything yet? How does this affect you internally? Are you getting frustrated because you just want to eat the snack? And then you can start to chew, see what you notice. Maybe the flavors change. Maybe you notice how it feels between your teeth. And finally, you can swallow the bite. Maybe you feel it go down your throat. Maybe you can still taste it in your mouth even after you've swallowed it. It really doesn't matter. It doesn't matter what the experience was. The point is just that we're noticing the experience. Then you take another bite and repeat the same thing over. Maybe you do this, for 5 minutes or so at snack time or at dinner time. Maybe you do this for 5 bites or something like that. It's not all of snack. It's not all of the meal. It's just taking some time to start to notice. And the food gives you that external concrete thing to focus on. You might use a fidget spinner as that concrete or external tool. Remember that using external tools slows down the brain and body enough to focus on the present experience. So you might spin the fidget spinner and bring all of your awareness to watching it spin. To some, I know a lot of people who dislike fidget spinners because they say that they are just a distraction, and maybe that might be true. But for some, focusing all of their attention on this one thing, on this fidget spinner that's spinning, allows the mind to calm, reset, prepare itself to learn. So the mind is going and going and going for some people, especially who have a lot of those stressors, those added stressors that we talked about earlier in this presentation that people with autism might face. And the fidget spinner allows them to direct all of their attention to this one thing so that all of those other things can fall to the background, even for just a short time. And this can slow down the brain. As another option, you might spin the fidget spinner, and for as long as it's spinning, bring all of your awareness to the rise and the fall of your chest. So as long as that keeps spinning, you're just noticing your inhale and exhale in the form of your chest raising and lowering. The fidget spinner kind of puts a timer on it. So as long as it's spinning, you're going to keep doing this. Once it stops, you'll stop. And that can help a person remain focused rather than going, I don't want to do this anymore. How much longer do I have to do this? And if that happens, if those thoughts do come up, that's okay. We just redirect them to the present moment. But having some sort of timer or a time-limited activity can help to decrease those thoughts. The 5 senses in nature is another mindfulness activity that you might try. Once you're outside, just take some breaths and notice how you feel in your body. Are you excited? Are you anxious? Are you wanting to run? Just notice. If you're doing this with a child, ask lots of guiding questions to help them notice. How do you feel? How do you feel in your legs right now? How do you feel in your chest right now? What feelings come up as we walk out the door? And then use your 5 senses to see what you notice is happening outside of you. What do you see? What do you hear? What do you smell? Remind yourself or your child to return to the present, to take breaths, feel the ground, notice what's around them. Now, feeling the ground beneath their feet is an excellent grounding exercise that helps us maintain our present awareness, that right now, this is where I am in space. And so feeling our feet on the ground, just notice what it's like to have the ground beneath your feet is a great way to redirect a wandering mind back to the present moment. And then just any thoughts that are coming up. That's okay. Just notice them and come back to the information that we're getting from the 5 senses. Maybe your child notices that, well, now that we got to this area, I'm really wanting to run. My legs really want to run. And that's okay. You can let them run. Just ask lots of questions to bring them back to the present. And this is not something that you have to do when you're in a forest or something like that. Not even when you're at a park. You could go outside onto your patio or your apartment balcony and do this. What do you see that's around you? What sounds do you hear? What do you smell? It doesn't matter. You can do this anywhere. It doesn't have to be in some nature setting. Have a tea party with your feelings. You ask your child to notice what they're experiencing, and then invite that experience, that thought or that feeling, to sit with you as you have tea. So again, this is a time-limited activity. There's a start and an end point. You're not just going to do this forever, which can be helpful for children. Doing this builds tolerance of emotions. We're going to invite your sadness to just come and sit with us. Pour some tea, have a chair and a place setting set for whatever is the feeling, and just sit. Just let it be there. Just notice it. Notice what messages it might be trying to send, or how you feel it in your body. Just invite it to be there and notice it. And this also provides time and practice with taking the time to notice emotions and the messages that they send. Now, this might seem childish or not something that a boy would be willing to do, and it doesn't have to be a tea party. Your goal is just to invite the feelings to sit with you and be present with them for some period of time. You can just invite your feelings to sit at the table and have a drink of water with you. You can invite your feelings and then set a timer. It doesn't have to be a tea party. It can be, just any way that you're inviting the feeling to the table to be present. And breathing buddies. This is a pretty well-known one, but it can be really great for young kids or people with autism, again, making it concrete in some way. You choose a stuffed animal or have the child choose a stuffed animal and lie down, putting the stuffed animal on your belly. Then you instruct the child to breathe deeply through the nose to the count of 3. Exhale, not exhale, but as you count to 3, inhaling, notice the stuffed animal rise as the belly fills with air. Some kids might need extra help focusing the visual. If that's not enough, you can teach them to say up or rise as the belly and the stuffed animal go up, and then say down or lower as the stuffed animal and the belly go down. And then exhale slowly to the count of 4, noticing the stuffed animal lower on the belly. For some kids, you might say that you're rocking the stuffed animal to sleep. And so the rise and fall of the belly is rocking the animal. So that might help for some kids. And then repeat it 5 times, 10 times, however many times the child is willing to continue to do it. And then just see what the child noticed. How do you feel now compared to before you started? What do you notice in your body? What are your emotions telling you? And once again, I just want to make the point that mindfulness is something that we grow, that we help to foster in our children. It's not something that someone is just automatically knows how to do, or something that we can pick up on right away. It's something that requires practice. And so modeling for your children how to be mindful, how to incorporate it into their daily routine, how to just notice what's happening around them and inside of them is really important if we want our kids to learn how to be mindful and to have all the benefits that come with a mindfulness practice. Okay, I'm going to answer a couple of questions, but I have a little list of resources here that you can look at while I pull up. Gosh, I'm sorry. While I pull up some questions. Dr. Daniel Siegel, who I mentioned earlier, has a TEDx talk on mindfulness for children and in schools. Here's the link to it on YouTube. The same person, Dr. Daniel Siegel, has a book called The Mindful Brain. This is more scientific, and it talks about how the brain physiologically changes through mindfulness, but it's a lot of really good information. Self-regulation and mindfulness, 82 exercises and worksheets for sensory processing, ADHD, and autism is available on Amazon. mindful games, book and activity cards have lots of things for young kids, a lot of those concrete activities that can help kids or someone with autism to focus on something outside of them. And there's this Smiling Mind app for both iOS and Android phones. I have not used it personally, but I have heard other people have had good experiences with it. I would caution that using an app for mindfulness practice might not be good for everyone, including me. If I'm opening my phone to use a mindfulness app, I'm probably going to get distracted by lots of other things on the phone, which is kind of the opposite of being present. So I would caution that it's not appropriate for everyone, but I have heard good things about that app. Okay, so I'm going to take just a second and pull up some questions. Okay, I have a question from someone asking about their 15-year-old who is nonverbal and uses things like some videos on his iPad as kind of like a security blanket. And can this be considered mindfulness since he's focusing on it? I would, without knowing your son specifically, my thought is that these videos, the iPad, are definitely a self-regulation strategy. He's using them, or he may be using them as a way to regulate his nervous system, that this helps to bring him back down. It's something external to focus on that can help his mind slow down or to help all of those stressors go into the background. I don't know if it is mindfulness in this case, because I don't know if he is practicing awareness of the present experience or if he is simply, watching the videos and the videos are pleasurable, or if they're what he's focusing on, or if he's focusing on his experience of watching the videos. And I don't know the answer to that without knowing your son or without having more specific information, but that is what I would encourage you to think about as you're, thinking about this question for your son. And and certainly you can use that as the starting point of teaching him to be mindful of a mindfulness practice. Allow him to watch the videos and then help him notice what's happening for him, what it's like for him to watch the videos. How does his body change? How does his body feel different? If he has the emotional awareness, how does he feel different emotionally? What kind of thoughts is he having? And how that might be different regarding or before and after watching the videos. I have a question about whether mindfulness techniques can be taught with ABA. Can be taught together with ABA methods. So yes, and I'm not sure what if the question is asking whether whether mindfulness and ABA can both be taught, or whether ABA methods can be used to teach mindfulness activities. but the answer to both is yes. Teaching mindfulness alongside of ABA, teaching the life skills, all of the social and emotional and learning skills, teaching mindfulness alongside of that is it's a great way to slow down the mind so that learning can be more effective. And yes, you can also use the principles of ABA, of reinforcement, to teach mindfulness, to teach someone to reinforce doing the activity. If mindfulness doesn't feel good, maybe you pair it with, and that may be the case if the emotions that they're experiencing or the thoughts that they're having or the body sensations are not pleasant. You might pair mindfulness with reinforcement in some way so that they learn, so that they can connect it with a more positive experience and will be more willing to do mindfulness in the future. Now, it's for a lot of people, it's I'm sorry, I'm reading another question. For many people, the act of mindfulness, the effect that it has, especially after they have practiced it and have gotten, more, they find it a little bit easier. The act of mindfulness is in and of itself reinforcing. And it looks like I am all out of time. But thank you for your time and attention today. Please follow the Johnson Center on YouTube. A recording of this webinar will be available. Also follow us on Facebook and Twitter and sign up for email notifications. Again, if you need a certificate of attendance, watch for an email that you'll get shortly after the end of this webinar, and it will give you a couple of quiz questions to answer, and then we'll send you your certificate. Thanks again for being with us, and